Herbert was a hard-working man with strong family values, and when International Harvesters, a company that manufactures and sells farming equipment, made him the offer to work for them starting in Connecticut, he and the young family emigrated to the USA. They made the move in 1955, and on the 23rd of February 1957, the couple welcomed their second child, a boy named Carl Eric Brandt, who we will be referring to from here on out as Charlie. Herbert was ambitious and motivated and moved up quickly in the corporation. He worked during the day and studied at night. This unfortunately meant that the family frequently had to move. Herbert had done so well for himself that he could afford a holiday in Florida, and after the birth of 2 more daughters, a decade after, would purchase a home in Fort Wayne in 1968, Indiana, where they decided to settle. So their 2 oldest children, Angela and Charlie. Where Angela was a social butterfly amongst her peers, Charlie seemed to be stuck in a cocoon, woven by not only his own personality disorders, but by the frequent relocation he was subjected to. His grades were good, and he was clearly an intelligent boy, earning good grades, but he struggled to make friends during this time, seemed a bit reclusive. He was overweight and introverted, as many lonely boys do. His dog was an old beagle, became his best friend, and the two would frequently go hunting for small game or on fishing trips. Herbert was aware of his son, who was described as meek and mild, his struggles, but apart from including him in outdoor activities, he felt that he had no other way to reach his son's troubled psyche and allowed the boy to deal with whatever was burdening his second oldest child. Elsa and Herbert were, by all accounts, wonderful and doting parents. Charlie might have been able to get the treatment he had needed, but in 1960s and the 1970s, psychiatry and physiology was still highly experimental for adults, let alone children. Many would speculate that it was an event that took place in December 1970 that unlocked the door to let a monster out. The Brandt's family fled the icy winter of Indiana during this time and would spend vacations in Florida in their second home. During these trips, Herbert and Charlie would often go hunting, taking Charlie's dog with them, of course. But it was during one of those outings that Herbert shot and killed Charlie's furry friend. Sources vary, but it seems that Herbert shot into a bush trying to get the dog's attention, and after it did not respond to commands to return to the father and son. The dog had been shot twice, and Charlie, although not openly showing it, was absolutely shattered. It was his best friend. Herbert took Charlie with his non-existent response as a sign that all is fine, and the two dragged the body of the dog to a place where they would later bury it, and a couple of days later would pack up and return to Fort Wayne to prepare for their new year. The trip would take 16 hours by car, and Charlie would be returning to school as a freshman. Back in Indiana, nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. The cold winter had wrapped an icy arm around Fort Wayne, and on the 3rd of January 1971, the Brandt family had already resumed their normal activities such as school and work. And that evening, as the family enjoyed pork chops and green beans at the dinner table, Charlie's mother berated her son for an unfinished project. Elsa was 8 months pregnant at the time, and after the meal, she took 3-year-old Jennifer and 2-year-old Melinda into their beds and decided to run a warm bath to relax. The family had recently purchased a colour television set, and the older children watched an FBI show before going back to the routine of the evening. The evening appeared normal as Herbert joined his wife, who was reading a magazine while soaking in the tub, and he had a shave. The atmosphere was relaxed as Charlie sat at the kitchen table working on his project, and Angela, who had retired to her own bedroom, was reading a book. Charlie was, however, restless and retrieved his father's Luger Pew Pew, What happened next would change the family's life forever. At around 9 p.m, Charlie walked into the bathroom where his parents were and first shot Herbert 3 times in the back. He then shot his pregnant mother 5 times as she lay in the tub. Angela would later say in a statement to police that she heard her father tell Charlie no and to stop. She also remembered her mother shouting for her to call the police, but before she could reach for the door, Charlie stood on her threshold, eyes glazed, and aiming the pew-pew at her. He pulled the trigger, but all it emitted was a dull click. Charlie had used all the bullets. He then attacked Angela, throwing her on the bed, beating her face repeatedly with his fists and trying to strangle her. In a moment of pure desperation, Angela shouted for Charlie to stop, telling her brother that she loved him. This declaration seemed to have flipped a switch in Charlie's brain, and she would later claim that it was as if Charlie was suddenly normal again, asking her in a confused way what he had done. Angela told him he had to get off her so they could figure things out together. Angela realized her life depended on her reaction, and she tried to calm her brother down, telling him that they could figure it out together and that they could take their little sisters and run away to a hippie colony. Amazingly, Charlie believed her and followed her downstairs. She told him to fetch blankets for the toddlers because it was unusually cold outside, and Charlie obeyed. Halfway back up the staircase, Charlie turned to his sister and said, "Promise me you will never leave me, Ange." At that moment, he appeared so sad and pathetic, but Angela's fear was overwhelming. Ange promised, but that moment, Charlie was out of sight. She flung open the front door and ran as if the devil himself was after her soul. She ran to the first neighbor's house, tried the doorknob, found it locked, and started to run again. And by now, Charlie had realized he had been betrayed. He stood on the front doorstep shouting, "Ange, you promised, you promised." At the second house, the occupants were still awake, playing cards, and as Angela blurted out the events in shock, they called the police. 2 more phone calls would be made that evening regarding the tragedy. Charlie had calmly walked to the first neighbor's house, knocked on the door, and when the owners opened the door, he told them that he'd killed his parents and that they needed to call the police. Unbelievably, Herbert had survived the 3 gunshot wounds and was able to call for help. In the aftermath, as the 39-year-old Herbert lay in his hospital bed recovering from his injuries and undoubtedly deep in mourning after the death of his pregnant wife, he made the decision that would later come back to haunt him. The 2 toddlers slept through the entire ordeal as the 38-year-old mother lost her life, and Herbert had already made the decision that the 2 youngest daughters would be told their mother had died in an accident. What they did not know would not hurt them, but all secrets find their way to the surface at some time. Charlie visited his father in hospital and apologized for shooting him. Herbert, in return, apologized for killing his dog. We have no witnesses for this exchange, but I have no doubt it was uncomfortable. So was Elsa and her unborn child's funeral, during which Herbert, who was bound to a wheelchair, gave his chained and shackled son a weak smile. Herbert had decided from the onset that he was going to support Charlie no matter what. He refused to believe the incident, which is how the family would refer to the crime afterwards, was nothing more than a once-off occurrence. Charlie was only 13 when he committed this crime, and as many parents would in his shoes, Herbert wanted a future for his son, which would include the best possible outcome from the investigation. Herbert told the police he had no idea why his son would have murdered Elsa or tried to kill him and Angela. Apart from the death of his dog, there was no outward signs that Charlie would commit the crimes he did, and as a grand jury convened, Charlie never showed any remorse or had any explanation for his actions. The court had to decide whether Charlie was a danger in the future to society, and a total of 3 separate evaluations would be made by 3 separate psychiatrists about his mental state. but they all agreed that Charlie was well-adjusted and a model patient who, despite his disconnect, loved his family and did not want to kill them. He claimed that it was as if he'd been programmed to kill, and the grand jury felt uncomfortable about releasing Charlie back into society. But after a year in a mental institution, Herbert convinced all the relevant authorities that Charlie posed no threat, and the teenager was sent back to his family home in 1972. Remaining in the house in Indiana seemed to be too emotionally challenging for all who kept the secret, and the family moved to their home in Florida to make a fresh start. Angela was struggling more than anyone seemed to acknowledge. She was constantly terrified of her brother. Her grades started to plummet soon after relocating to Florida, and she dropped out of school. She moved out of the home to try and forget the night she nearly died. Herbert, who had taken time to ensure that Charlie adapted to the changes, stayed for 2 years with him in Florida. But after meeting a woman, he decided to start a new life back in Indiana with his new lady and their 2 youngest daughters. Charlie would undoubtedly need supervision, and Herbert asked his parents to come from Germany and take care of Charlie, at least until he'd graduated. Charlie did well, finishing school and got good grades and obtaining a qualification in electronics, for which he had a real gift. His sister had a childhood sweetheart named Jim. Angela married Jim, a struggling musician whom she had a relationship since her early school years. Jim and Charlie seemed fast friends, even though Angela had told him everything about what happened on that cold night in January when she lost her mother. And despite this information, Jim felt Charlie was a close friend, and the two regularly went hunting and fishing together. The marriage between Angela and Jim did not last, and Angela would later claim that she believed the 2 high school sweethearts married too soon. But the friendship remained between Charlie and Jim. He even stayed with Charlie during his studies for a short period of time after the divorce. It was during a fishing trip, among the smell of bait and a couple of beers, that Jim would open up to his brother-in-law about the pain, rejection and the heartache he felt about the divorce. And as Jim vented about the loss of his marriage, Charlie calmly turned to him with a dead serious expression on his face and said, "If you really want revenge, you should kill her. Cut her out, cut her heart out and eat it." Jim, intoxicated and confused, was quite taken aback by this remark that appeared to be made by Charlie in a dead serious manner about his own sister. His feeling of unease even more heightened when he realised for the first time that Charlie would never kill his catch. To Jim, these events and occurrences were disturbing, but not disturbing enough to call off the friendship. And while in college, Charlie even stayed with Jim and his mother for a period of time. Angela, however, never forgot the secret the family shared. She hardly saw Charlie in future years and would never leave her children alone with him. She made sure that there were clear boundaries when he visited, and he was never allowed to stay over. It's unclear if Jim was in denial about the friendship he had with Charlie and the strange ways that Charlie had. But Jim invited Charlie to go on a double date with his new girlfriend Nancy and her friend Terry. Sparks immediately flew, and the two were dating frequently. After the first time they met, and they married later, but Terry noticed some of Charlie's strange tendencies. Charlie often took fishing trips alone and was also fond of reading medical books as if he was studying to be a doctor, and had to have intimate knowledge about everything about the anatomy. He had a massive poster, the likes of which you would find in a biology class, and the half body showing muscle and veins and the other half showing the bones of the body being posted behind the door. What made the poster odder was the fact that Charlie by no means had an occupation that would require this intimate knowledge about the inner workings of the body, and the poster was clearly that of a woman with her hair done up in a bun. This poster would eventually find its way into the back of Charlie's bedroom door, which he would eventually share with his wife. And on this day, no one could understand how she would allow such a creepy and aesthetically disturbing item in their bedroom. Regardless, the two met in April 1985. They were married on the 29th of August 1986, and everyone who knew the couple would describe them as blissfully happy. The wedding was small and with only Nancy and Jim in attendance, and no other family members were invited. Friends of the pair would comment secretly that they wished their own relationship had the intimate and loving energy that existed between Charlie and Terry. Terry left her job at the retail shop and became a dental assistant while Charlie was still working for Raytheon. The two would pack each other's lunches just because they believed it would taste better made by somebody who loved you. The marriage on the inside, however, was not all heart-shaped candy and roses. Before the two married, Jim urged Charlie to tell Terry about his past, and when Charlie gave a non-committal nod, Jim threatened him that if he did not, Jim would. Angela also had the same discussion with her brother, and both presumed that he had told Terry. And when Terry said during a conversation that considering everything they had decided that having children was not a good idea, it was obvious that those who knew the secret had carried it on for so long that the mere mention of what Charlie had done took tremendous effort. And instead of following up with they presumed Terry knew about the night Charlie had killed his mother and unborn sibling. The only telltale sign was that the secret ever happened was the 3 ugly scars on Herbert's back that you could see when he didn't have a shirt on, sat next to the pool in the sun. But like the army, there was an unspoken rule that you don't ask and don't tell. Terry must have seen these scars, but she trusted that her husband would tell her if there was anything to tell. On September the 20th, 1978, a 13-year-old girl named Carol Ann Sullivan went missing. She appeared to have vanished from a bus stop. Carol Ann was feeling very proud of herself as it was the first time she had made the walk from home to the bus stop. The kidnapping and murder of the teenager would many years later be linked to Charlie, as police speculated that he must have abducted her from this bus stop. Her remains would be found a month later near a favourite fishing horn of Charlie's. Her head had been removed and placed on a rusted paint bucket. As Jim and his mother were discussing the horrifying discovery over supper or while watching the news, Charlie, who had still been staying with them, burst out in uncontrollable laughter. Jim's mother had been so shaken by Charlie's reaction that she asked him to find other lodgings after this strange outburst. Something about her house guest had suddenly made her feel really uncomfortable, and shortly after the outburst he was asked to leave. Charlie continued to fish near where the head of the little girl was found. By now, Charlie was working as a radar technician. He travelled across the country and did work in the Bahamas. The pay was good, but he found the work repetitive, and one afternoon while fishing, Charlie, according to his statement, stumbled upon a bag of coke. He slowly sold the stash and was able to purchase a $250,000 house in the Keys. The house was magnificent and the property was on the beach. Charlie went back to working for the company he'd worked for, which was contracted by the government to detect smugglers. It appears that being wealthy enough to retire at the age of 28 was not all he expected. On the 17th of December 1986, a woman named Lisa decided to leave a party in Big Pine Keys early and make her way on foot. Her body was later found the following day, only a mile from where the party was held. She was so badly mutilated and her eyes had been removed. Her head had been smashed, so many of her organs were missing, including her heart, and her body was found not far from Charlie's home. Terry, who was described by all as a vivacious and bubbly person, had begun to keep a diary. Some entries would often contain the words "weird day," while others would note the dates and times Charlie left the house and returned. She had clearly begun to be suspicious of her husband, who would come home from his apparent fishing trips covered in blood, but with no catch. None of the entries indicated fear on her part, but her growing unease was visible in her notes. Sherry Pedico was beautiful, but by the time her path crossed with that of Charlie's, she was living in a rowboat not far from his home in Big Palm Keys. Her body, which was almost decapitated, was found by fishermen not far from where the couple had had a picnic near the water on the 19th of July 1989. Her stomach had been cut open, her heart was missing. Her autopsy would determine that she had died from blood loss or drowning. The boat showed deep cut marks, and investigators canvassed the neighbourhood but stopped a door or two before the Brandt household dwelling. Charlie might not have been on the police's radar, but Terry was starting to feel uncomfortable with her knowledge about Charlie. All across Florida during the 80s and 90s, bodies would keep appearing, grotesquely mutilated and butchered. But Charlie's records from the crimes he committed as a child were sealed, and therefore he was never even on the police's list or radar. Darlene Toller was a mother of 3, with addiction issues and 3 children to feed. Life was hard. Her boyfriend would watch over the kids as she scoured the night area in Little Havana to make money to put food on the table and tame the substance demon that she lived with. Her body was found wrapped not only in plastic but in a blue blanket. The blanket contained dog hair, and long after the case went cold, it would be determined that the dog hairs belonged to a friend's dog, which Charlie had taken to the vet in that very same blanket. Darlene was butchered and her organs so skillfully removed that investigators were astounded at the precision. Her death would also be linked to Charlie, who had kept a meticulous record of the mileage he travelled, the distance correlated with the route he travelled that day. The year 2004 was just one of those years that the Keys could not escape hurricanes. Hurricanes were part of the price you paid to live in paradise, and when the storm warnings came, Charlie and Terry would board up their home and stay at Terry's niece's home in Orlando. Terry was like a surrogate mother to Michelle Jones, and their 3 would always have a great time during the visits. Michelle was a very successful young woman working for the Golf Channel. Her condo was luxurious, with a large swimming pool and enough rooms for everyone. And at 37, Michelle was a sales executive who had the world in the palm of her hand. And Charlie was very excited to see his niece. He would joke around with his friends, calling her Victoria's Secret. He had undoubtedly gone through the underwear drawer because that was the brand of underwear garments Michelle would buy. On Thursday, the 9th of September 2004, Terry and Charlie began boarding up their home against the storm, and they arrived at Michelle's home on the 10th of September and had a great time, which included Debbie, one of Michelle's best friends. Deciding that she was too intoxicated to go home, Debbie stayed over, and at 2 a.m. in the morning she made her way to Michelle's kitchen for a drink of water, where she found Charlie pacing up and down, occasionally staring with a glazed look at the butcher's block that contained Michelle's kitchen knives. When he noticed her, he did not say a word, but just stared openly at her breasts. The entire experience freaked her out so much that she left the next morning, certain that if she'd stayed, something bad would have happened. On September the 12th, Terry and Charlie went to visit Charlie's father. Later that afternoon, the gang went to Jennifer's home for supper. Charlie's behaviour was odd and restless. He told Terry that he wanted to go back to their own home in the Keys. Terry convinced him to stay a little longer. On Monday, the 13th of September, the storm had subsided. Terry was now ready to go, but to her surprise, Charlie wanted to stay for a day or 2 longer. Lisa, another friend of Michelle's, was supposed to come for dinner that evening, but Michelle called her close friend and told her it was not a good idea. Terry and Charlie had been drinking heavily and were arguing constantly. Later that evening, Michelle's mother called her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. This was unusual because the two would talk on a daily basis. Terry was not answering her phone, and by the evening Michelle's mother was convinced enough that she called Debbie and asked her to go to the house and check to see if everything was okay. Debbie had also been trying to get hold of Michelle to make plans for the girls' trip the following week, but felt uneasy about the lack of communication with her friend. It was late in the evening when Debbie arrived at Michelle's home. She found all the cars were still in the driveway, but got no response when she knocked. Debbie had a spare key for Michelle's house and tried to unlock the door. The key wouldn't work, likely because it was locked from the inside with Michelle's key, and in the end, this would be a blessing. Debbie moved around to where the garage was and decided to see if she could see anything through the window. The image that greeted her would haunt her for the rest of her life. Charlie hung from a noose he had manufactured from a bedsheet. The Florida heat had sculptured his dead form into a purple mass with bulging eyes and protruding tongue. The overwhelming shock and panic drove her to call the police. Investigators didn't find it easy to open the front door, but once inside, the horror of what unfolded was evident. Terry lay on a sofa with a t-shirt and pajama pants pulled down in an act of humiliation. Sources vary, but she had received between 7 and 10 stab wounds, so deep that they penetrated the sofa pillows beneath her. It was, however, Michelle's room that the real nightmare would haunt the seasoned police officers that awaited them. Michelle was unrecognizable. Her body had been mutilated and her head had been removed and placed next to the body, almost as if Charlie wanted her to see, even in death, what he had done to her. It also appeared that he had brushed her hair. Her breast had been removed and her intestines, which appeared to have been cleaned for inspection, lay in a lined bin bag next to the bed. Her rib cage had been opened and her heart had been taken out. The room was covered with blood, soaked towels and Victoria's Secret underwear, some of it torn and laid as if he had tried to put it on. Her leg was severed. The killing wound was a stab to the back, which likely happened as he surprised her in the bathroom as her back was turned to him. It was also clear that after having his playtime with Michelle's body, Charlie had showered, dressed her in clean clothes, and then hung himself in the garage. As veterans ran out of the house vomiting on the lawn, Debbie began to call relatives. Herbert was eerily quiet on the phone, but Angela immediately went to the police station and finally told investigators their secret, their family secret that they'd been keeping for so long. Angela told investigators everything, which helped tremendously with connecting the dots. They read Terry's journals, followed by his meticulous record-keeping of miles on his computer. They found hundreds of disturbing, violent pictures of children, autopsy photos and snuff films, and they studied his method of killing and linked him to a lot of murders. And Debbie told of a time she caught Charlie watching her secretly as she bathed in the lake. And when she asked him what he was doing, he said nothing. He just slithered back into the woods. In the end, the 4 murders mentioned earlier would all be linked to Charlie. Investigators estimated that he could also be linked to between 20 and 27 other murders. But there was unfortunately not enough evidence to do this definitively. And when it comes to the Dr. Phil show, people have many opinions. And he managed to get Herbert, Angela, Jim, Michelle's parents and sister on the show to discuss the damage in secret. Angela still seemed to fear her dead brother, and Jim tried his best to explain the circumstances surrounding the secret. Michelle's family, on the other hand, was consumed in pure rage, and as Dr. Phil tried his best to promote and up his ratings, all I saw was 6 people, so many years later, still wrapped tightly in a blanket of pain. The shame and guilt. It would be a perfect world if we could all see the future and by predicting problems, find solutions to avoid them from happening in the first place. But we don't live in a perfect world. This is just another horrendous case. And this time, so many victims. Some will probably never see justice. Some may have not even been found. My heart goes out to the families of everybody involved in this video. Thank you for listening, guys. As always, take care. I hope you've had a wonderful Christmas, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.